Doncs ara tenim a Rolf Bäcker, professor d'acá de l'ESMUC, que ens parlarà del modo dorio en el flamenco, de exotismo, ¿sí? De orientalismo en música y de muchas connotaciones que tiene o que puede tener este modo de música.
Bon vespre, good afternoon. And now for something completely different. I have to think about this because we will change our topic completely. We'll move on to flamenco music and to the construction of certain discourses around flamenco music. And to start with, I would like to ask you two things. One is to bear in mind this image. Okay, this is a lyre guitar, French lyre guitar from 1815. So basically a classical guitar, standard tuning, standard playing technique, but with a lyre body. Okay, just bear this in mind. And the second thing I would like to ask you is, beyond what all we musicians think when we hear the word Doric or Dorian, which is minor scale with a major sixth, beyond this, what do you think when you hear this word? What are the images and the meanings which come to mind when you hear this? Some ideas? What does Doric or Dorian mean to you? Nothing, I think.
Classical Greek.
For example, anything more or more specific?
Ancient. Gregorian chant.
Uh-huh. Nothing more?
Rolf Bäcker.
Okay, then we'll move on, and I will try to suggest some ideas of what we can associate with this term. At first, I will try to make clear what we are talking about here. This thing called modo dorico in flamenco is actually this scale which we have here transposed to E. So it's E, F, G, which might be natural or sharp, A, B, C, D. Okay, and at this point, most of you should react and say, "Well, this is not what I know to be Dorian."
Where's the major six?
Yeah, for example, where's the major second, and so on. So for this reason, I've put also the Dorian mode as we know it in classical theory and jazz theory. First in E, just to have the comparison, and then transposed to D, as we usually conceive it. This is what we know in classical music and jazz music as Dorian mode. However, what we know on the scale we have over here, the modo dorico, actually we know it with the D natural and with the G sharp too. The Phrygian mode in classical and jazz theory is actually like this. So there seems to be a certain kind of confusion between the two. And the interesting thing would be where does this confusion come from, and more interesting even how it can be used in certain discourses. Okay, the last scale would be just the G sharp variant, sometimes called the Phrygian dominant or HM5, so harmonic minor 5 mode. From now on, I will try to call it E mode when I'm talking about this. That's to avoid to give it a more picturesque name. Okay. So how we will do this? I'm not here to propose new methodologies, so we'll just go to some quite traditional ways of analyzing meanings, and I will start with typically Saussurean division between signifiant and signifié. So if we apply this to the modo dorico, then the word modo dorico would be the signifiant, and this scale would be the signifié. Okay, so we start from this point, and then I would like to try to apply a slightly more modern concept from semiotics, which is the encyclopedia, as Umberto Eco defines it in his Semiotica e Filosofia del Linguaggio, which basically is a complete list of all meanings, denotations and connotations which a certain concept might have. Obviously, within these 20 minutes I have at my disposal, I will not arrive at describing this complete encyclopedia. But nonetheless, I will try to do so because the exercise we've done at the beginning, which is to think beyond the Dorian scale and ask what does Dorian mean to me, is the first step to arrive at a broader vision, a broader horizon of what Dorian could mean. Okay, so then we will apply this to both parts of the science. So we'll take the name modo dorico and we'll try to give a broader meaning of what Dorian means, but then we'll take also the scale itself and it's actually the same thing. So we will take the significació as a whole sign in itself and ask also for its two parts. Okay, so let's start with this. Dorian obviously refers to a region in Greece called Doris, which is where supposedly the Dorians or Dories came from. So you see the region encircled in red on the map. Then, of course, it also refers to the Dorians themselves. So one of the four principal Greek-speaking ethnic groups in antiquity, alongside, as you see, Aeolians, Achaeans, and Ionians, and the territories. And this is an interesting thing because one very important thing is that they were Greek. And this is especially important to understand what associations can be related to the scale names, for example, as even the Greeks themselves used them. We will see this later on. Okay, so then the third meaning would be the Dorian dialect of ancient Greek, called Dorismos, which is, you know, that sometimes we speak of ancient Greek as it was one language, and usually we think about the koine, which many poets used, and which was kind of a lingua franca shared by many speakers of different dialects. But actually, before and even during the time the koine was used, there were all other dialects, and one of the most important, surely, is this one, is Dorian. We have here some poets who used it, like Pindaros, Alkmanos, and so on. These are 5 of the 9 canonical Greek poets. So 5 of 9 is quite a lot. So we see that really the importance of this dialect in poetry. And it's also featured prominently in choral poetry, so even within the Attic drama. So it's really an important dialect. And it has also some sub-dialects, one of which also evokes some very interesting things like Laconian. Sometimes when we talk about someone who expresses himself in a very certain manner, we call him Laconian, and this comes actually from here. So here we have a beginning of a meaning which is actually induced by this term. I beg your pardon, I need some water. Okay, then this, which I thought you would perhaps mention when I asked for more meanings of Dorian, was the Doric order. So one of the 3 ancient Greek architectural orders. By the way, the simplest of the 3, which is also an important detail. So bear this in mind. This Doric order is the simplest one. It's the one on the right, up above, which you see here. The one on this left side is Tuscan, so it cannot be called properly. It does not belong properly to the Greek orders. But this is an interesting point. Okay, then of course we should talk about music. So, of course, the name Dorian also appears in classical Greek music theory in the Systema Deleion. But the interesting thing is, especially when we think about this contradiction we've perceived at the beginning, that what we would call Phrygian in flamenco is called Dorian, and vice versa. So then we have exactly the same situation here. So what the ancient Greeks called the Dorian octave actually was the E mode. And of course it was thought descendant, not ascendant, which is another important difference to how we think scales today. So if you just look at the first two, Dorian and the Phrygian, you will see that they're just inverted in respect to what we think today. The other two complete the picture, the Leiden octave, which we think as an F mode, here is a C mode, and the Slide here is a B mode instead of the G mode, which we would expect. Okay, then this perhaps is one of the strangest of the meanings we could associate with Doric or Dorian, which is a dialect of Lowland Scots. Okay, Lowland Scots is a language, an Indo-European language closely related to English and spoken in these regions you see here on the map. And it's can be divided in dialects, and the one you have encircled in red actually is what is called Doric, or Doric, as they would say. Alan Kent's talking about. So you might have heard it even. I don't know if you have seen the Walt Disney film Merida or Brave, as it was called here in Spain. Did you? Did you see it? Okay. Basically, the argument is there's a Scottish princess, and there are 4 pretenders who would like to marry her. And one of them, every time he speaks in the film, the others would not understand him. And this is kind of a running gag throughout all the film. And actually, this is because he speaks Doric. So this is really the strangest, very much the strangest of all Scots dialects. And now, why do I explain all this to you? We're not talking about Scottish dialects here. The interesting question is here, why is this dialect called Doric? And we have some explanations. Actually, one of the explanations is supposed opposition between the countryside of Scotland, as opposed to the capital Edinburgh. Edinburgh, which always had been very much anglicised, which was the centre of the Scottish Enlightenment, and in opposition to the countryside, which was dominated by Lowland Scots. And so Edinburgh had the nickname of being the Athens of the North. So if Edinburgh was Athens, so up to a certain point people perceived that the people of the countryside, especially in this very root-speaking countryside, were perceived as Dorians. So it's this kind of opposition which is there, and which is up to a certain point ambivalent, which means it can be seen as negative, so the culturalized and civilized people from the Athens of the North, and then the more uncivilized or barbarian Dorians of the countryside. But actually there were poets as early as the 18th century, like William Ramsay, who defended their uncivilizedness, so to speak, and so reinterpreted the term Doric, giving it a positive meaning. But this, we have to bear this in mind too, that this term Doric has positive and negative connotations, which can be put into action according to the context in which it is used. Okay, so then move on to the signifié, which means the E mode. What does the E mode evoke? So if we take this E mode again as a whole sign, we could ask for how is it called in different contexts. And I've divided this according to the third, if it's natural, or if it's a minor third or a major third. So if it's the G natural or the minor third, then it has the name, of course, as we've seen Dorian in ancient Greek theory. Then in the Middle Ages, it changed to Deuterus Authenticus, and then finally to Phrygian as we know it today. But then what is more interesting is the name with the G sharp. And there are plenty of names used for this scale in different contexts. Actually, internet is full of these terms. And what is really shocking is that they all have something in common. So some people call it the Oriental scale, some people call it the Spanish scale, the Jewish scale, the Spanish Phrygian scale. In Jewish culture, actually, it's called Ahava Ravo, which is a name of a song which bears this scale. Sometimes this happens. In Yiddish culture, it's called Phrygisch, which is a dialectal variant of the term Phrygian in the Yiddish language. And in Arab music theory, it's called Al-Hijaz, or Al-Hijazi, which refers to a region in today's Iraq. And in this configuration, it appears as early as the Middle Ages, and the famous Arab music writers as Al-Farabi, for example, and Ibn Sina. And even if we not stick too close to this form of the scale, for example, if we build another mode from it, instead of playing it from E to E or thinking it from E to E, thinking it from D to D, you can find lots of other variants of this scale, and with more names still, like Romanian minor, Ukrainian Dorian, Ukrainian minor, and so on. So I added a third variant, which apart from the G sharp, adds a D sharp, which sometimes happens in flamenco too. And if we take this into consideration, we have also the name Gypsy major and Arab scale. Of course, Arab scale is not a name used within Arab culture or Islamic culture, but it's an Occidental term. I think it's quite evident. By the way, when I'm using gypsy, the term gypsy here, it's because people use this term. In order to be politically correct, we actually should not talk about gypsies, but about Roma, which is the term they use since the 70s and 80s for referring to themselves. And gypsy bears some connotations which are clearly negative, so I think we should avoid this term altogether, if it's not, as in this case, when talking about a musical terminology. Okay, then let's look at the meaning of the mode itself, not the name, not its names, but the scale itself. So, in ancient Greek music, first of all, it is perceived as a Greek mode. That's what I was talking about before. When we read sources from ancient Greece, then we will see that these names they give to the scales usually come from peoples who bear these names. So, the Dorians were a people, the Phrygians were, the Lydians were, and so on. And some of these peoples were actually Greek, as the Dorians, for example, and others were not, as the Phrygians. So here we have a difference between identity and alterity, which has to be taken into consideration when dealing with these meanings. So for this reason I put here Greek, that is belong to the own cultural identity. Then there are other meanings added to this, like valor, warrior-like, meaning manliness. Okay, so these terms actually appear in some of the most important sources when dealing with these topics. Foremost, Plato and Aristotle. So that's what we find there. Okay, when we move on to church music, then we have pleading and moaning as central contexts for the scale. especially for Lent and the time of the Holy Week. So these are the Christian associations. And classical music, of course, we find it a lot, and almost always with an exoticist meaning. So if we check out, for example, Milli Balakirev, Félicien David, Liszt Ferenc, these are the classical examples of the use of the scale with clearly exotic oriental associations. But this is not limited to classical music. Actually, we find the same. We could have a look at jazz, for example, if we think about John Coltrane with his Olé album, for example. If we think about Miles Davis with some of his modal tunes inspired clearly by Spanish music. In rock music, for example, in heavy metal music is one of the most used scales, always with exotic or mysterious or occult associations. So this is a clear tendency which we can observe here. Okay, so what happens in flamenco? What does the scale mean within flamenco? Really? Okay. We should differentiate between two visions, the emic vision and the etic vision, as flamenco is a phenomenon which is perceived, of course, inside by the players and performers themselves, but also from the outside. This is a quite successful musical product. I mean, everyone's talking about Rosalia these days, and we clearly could discuss if this is flamenco or not, but at least there is something of it in it. So let's see, the emic vision would be a vision of age, great age. So the palos, which is the genres used in flamenco, the oldest ones usually use the Dorian mode. It has also associations of purism, of dignity, of depth. Remember that a synonym for flamenco is cante hondo, which literally means deep song. So depth really is an important category in flamenco, and not always, but sometimes there's the special sense of drama and sadness associated with this scale. The etic version actually repeats what we have seen before in classical music and rock music. So it's exotic heritage. Some writers associate this with Phoenician, Byzantine, Jewish, Arab, Islamic, or Gypsy or Indian influences in flamenco. We will talk about this later on. Then the sense of social or individual drama is also perceived very strongly. So many tourists, for example, who listen to flamenco for the first time, later on say that they perceived the perception of being persecuted of the gypsies, for example. So this is one of these social dramas which seem to resonate in flamenco. And there's also the question of sadness and of suffering. So we can draw some preliminary conclusions. The term Dorian, so the signifiant of the beginning, we see that it is identified as Greek as opposed to non-Greek or barbaroi from Asia Minor, so this is a positive connotation. But it can also be seen as simple as opposed to complex, as rustic as opposed to civilized, and therefore can potentially have a negative meaning depending on the value system and the context in which it is applied. Then the mode can also be summarized in a position. So according to antiquity, Greek is what's seen as Greek. This means opposed to non-Greek, to barbaroi from Asia Minor, the same as we've seen before, as manly, as opposed to effeminate, and as Apollinian, as opposed to Dionysian. How's this pronounced? Clive? Dionysian, thank you.
It's Apollonian as well.
Okay, so this would be positive, applying the value system, of course, which was active there. And then, on the other hand, in modern time, it would be associated with exotic and oriental, which means non-European or non-Western associations, and even as it's perceived as effeminate, which means not manly, and Dionysian, which is exactly the opposite of what we've seen before, which is quite interesting. I put the last two into brackets because these are inferences of the first meaning. If you have a look at Edward Said, for example, in his classic reference book about exoticism, then you will see that the exotic in Western culture usually, more often than not, is associated with effeminate values and with a kind of orgiastic ambience. So this is this modern context. Okay, the question is, how did the term Doric and the E mode came to be associated? We actually don't know exactly when this happened, although we might possibly not be wrong if we think that it is quite unlikely that this is linked directly, that there's a direct link between flamenco and ancient Greek culture, so that just the time, the chronology does not work here. It is also quite unlikely that ancient Greek music theory and its terminology has entered into the flamenco discourse since more than half a century ago, so this is quite a recent phenomenon. Then another interesting point is that the positive connotations of the term Doric are far more widely known than the negative ones. So usually people nowadays would link the term Doric with the ancient Greek culture and the origin of Western culture, the fathers and the birthplace of Western culture. So these rustic and simplicist connotations are not so dominant. Then we also see that some of the connotations of the term and of the scale seem to openly contradict themselves. So, for example, Doric is not perceived as exotic, while the E mode clearly is. So how we could explain this? Flamenco has had, since its beginning, an aura of exoticism, and it still has today. And even it is quite clear that this association was what appealed to the bourgeoisie inside and also outside Spain since the 19th century and even today. So if flamenco was not as exotic, surely it wouldn't have the success it has today. Then one thing which characterizes flamenco too is there's a vast array of ideological backgrounds from people who wrote about, or still write about flamenco, and they try to appropriate flamenco for their personal objectives. So the exotic and especially the Islamic connotations sometimes are seen as quite desirable and sometimes they are not. For example, one of the people who claimed that flamenco was actually Arab was Blas Infante, actually a name that appeared yesterday too when we're talking about the carnival in Cadiz. So he was someone who defended the otherness of Andalusia with reference to the rest of Spain, and the critical issue here was the Arab heritage in Andalusia. While many other writers actually wanted to clear flamenco of its exotic connotations. The most famous example surely is Manuel de Falla, who argued that flamenco actually came from Byzantium and from Byzantine church music, which is actually quite unlikely. But it has the very interesting advantage that Byzantine music seems exotic to our ears, but it is Christian. So this is a very important point. So, as a result, what can we say? That connecting flamenco with ancient Greek culture allowed for a highly positive association with one of the main sources of Western culture, even despite its paganism. Let's remember that ancient Greek culture is not Christian, but they're pagans. They're not Islamic or Jewish, which is a big, big difference. If we look at, for example, what happened when Spain started to colonize America, then the crucial issue was that the Indians were seen as pagans and not as Islamic or Jewish, so they had the favor of being able to be converted to Christianism, whereas the fight against Islam and Judaism had other means. Yes, exactly. So this is really a big difference. And so, if we consider this scale and per extensionen flamenco as being based on the Dorian scale, we actually pretty little off from this embarrassing connections with Islam and Judaism. And by the way, we establish a relation with one of the big mother cultures of Western civilization. And just to close, this is the last slide, I wanted to show you two quotations from a very influential book about flamenco. It's from Ippolito Rossi, called Teoria del Cantafondo, a theory of flamenco, of deep song, published in Barcelona in 1966. Please mark that this is plain period of Franco dictatorship. So this is very important to bear in mind. Actually, the two quotations, the one is from the very beginning, that is really a declaration of intentions. I will read it to you. People say, and it is assumed as correct, that flamenco or cantafondo, deep song, is originally Arab. Others say that it is Gypsy or Indian, and others that it is Jewish. No one, however, says that it is a Spanish art, as if the Spanish were incapable of creating anything and had to import everything from foreign countries. So here he makes clear what he wants to demonstrate, which is that flamenco is not Gypsy, not Islamic, not Arab, not Jewish, not Indian, but it is Spanish. Okay, so this is, I mean, this fits quite well into the cultural politics in the Franco dictatorship, which was actually based on the idea to sell to the tourists a product which appealed to them, which was flamenco, but cleaning it of its embarrassing connotations. And then in the second quotation, he talks actually about the Greeks and about the Dorian mode. The contact between the Greek of Phocaia and the Spanish people was established before the flourishing of music theory in Greece. Therefore, it was possible for García Matos to say logically enough that the Dorian mode was imported by the Greek from the south of Spain, although they eventually gave the name of Doria when systemizing the scales. So, what he's suggesting here is that ancient Greek music theory actually comes from Spain. So, the thing is that this book is highly influential, and we still read these theses today. I think it is absolutely clear what is happening here. So here a discourse is established which uses a term coming from ancient Greek theory with all its connotations to wash flamenco clean and to convert it into a product capable of representing Spain in its especially Christian fundamentals. Thank you very much.
I would like to understand. I mean, I was convinced, but I still can't understand the link between exotic and feminine. Can you explain?
Of course. This is actually what Edward Said describes in his book about exotism. Basically, what he did was analyzing French and English literature in the late 18th and 19th century, and especially literature which deals with exotic Oriental topics. And usually the world described was analyzed according to certain items which always appeared. So people would associate, for example, Orient with the harem. And so they would really imagine Orient as being a world where women are free, at free disposal of all men in the harem at any time, and of a world where sexual pleasure is not as limited and as stigmatized as it is, or as it was in 19th century Europe. Of course, these are fantasies which have to do anything to do with reality of harem and of the woman in the Orient. But this is the image which was created, and so it's something we can easily see even in music examples. Whenever there are Arab situations described in operas, in novels, then this thing comes to mind. And actually, what is very interesting is that this dichotomy between manly and effeminate also plays a certain role in the cultural politics of Franco's dictatorship. So, for example, this Spanish cinema tried to establish a certain dichotomy between Andalusia, considered effeminate, fiesta, this, and opposed to Castilla with its very manly and sober attitude. So these are classical associations which are very easily to be found in many European literatures and artistic production, and in Spain too, and also very close to flamenco. So yeah.
Thank you. Interesting. No more? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
La siguiente comunicación es de Enrique Waus y Félix Pastor, ¿sí? Que nos van a hablar sobre the challenging to hegemony performative time in music expanding to the temporal perception of Weber, 27. La expansión temporal de Weber, el más conciso de los compositores de Occidente, ¿sí? Y en su resumen, Enrique y Félix nos dicen que, bueno, con cierta intervención, entiendo que electrónica, de la interpretación, ¿sí? Proponen una expansión perceptual temporal del Opus 27 de Weber usando Instagram, que espero que sea un programa de procesador de sonido y no la red social. No me los imagino haciéndose selfies tocando Weber a los amigos. A ver.
What you just heard is a sped up version of a piece, an extremely sped up version of a piece based on Webern's Opus 27, Piano Variations, the second movement. If you know the piece, it might seem strange that this is sped up, but it is, compared to what it really the original is, it is. And Bleak will talk later at how this piece is made, because it is actually a piece on its own, a new piece, different from the other one. And what I wanted to present was a different facet of the same piece, which is taking this piece as a model. Say it's inspired on Webern's Opus 27, but it's actually a little closer. And as such, we will examine it a little bit as a model, as an excuse to think about the idea of using models in music analysis or in music research. The use of models in other disciplines is very common, and at least explicitly. We do it also. We don't do it as explicitly, but even something as a simple functional analysis or functional description is a modelization, is a reduction. A figured bass is a modelization of music, and we don't call it that, but we do it. The interest of a model, or why we would think about doing something like this, is actually twofold. In this case, maybe the second part might be more interesting. The first part is it allows us to find connections, and in that we have plenty of examples in traditional analysis, like for example a Schenkerian graph allows us to trace connections that are otherwise hidden. These connections are just as valuable or as real, even though we tend to separate them from our experience of music. We connect something that happens in bar 1 with the movement of the second degree to the first degree right before the coda. We do it as a common thing, and yet when we talk about music and what it means, we rarely have that in mind. The second part where a model might be interesting is in the process of reduction. When we create a model, we reduce, and therefore we can challenge the model, we can criticize the model to see how correct it is or how isn't. And in other words, how well does it fit what we think the music is, and how well we really know our music. Things like, for example, doing a pitch class set analysis of tonal piece is absurd, and it makes us realize how important octave equivalence is when we talk about tonal music, the fact that it isn't equivalent, but then in other systems it is. So without getting too much in detail, we will have probably questions after of the details in the ways in which the model actually reflects the piece. There are a couple of things that I did want to show as kind of the good things about it, because there are plenty of things you might have recognized that are strange if this is supposed to be Webern's piece. As it was said, the origin of the piece is an analysis, and this is a translation. And we focused mostly on things that are not so obvious in the performance. This is a movement that goes by very quickly, and yet there's a very careful architecture in this piece that goes by, again, very quickly. And that if you actually analyze the piece, or if you think you were Webern investigating his material, he had to be aware of this. There's a connection between the way in which the tone row is made, in which the tone row is performed in its symmetries, and the way in which the tone row emphasizes certain intervals that are precisely symmetric, the tritone. So all of that together creates a body, I guess, of knowledge that escapes us when we see it. In this case, the model emphasizes this graphically. You've probably been able to follow, and maybe you're wondering what those numbers were. Those are the tone rows, and of all the possibilities, you can see that there are very few that are being colored. This is not the entire piece yet, but there's a choice being made. It's a choice that Webern did, and that there has to be some explanation for these choices. Some of these are very obvious. Some of these can be traced to the surface, but some of these might not be. The point of this experiment, or the interest, despite the fact that it can be, there are things that this is a work in progress. It's a proposal for a methodology. Besides these things, is that it allows us to think of this music as an unfolding of a structure. What we get at the end of this simulation is actually kind of a building, and a building that we've been seeing how it's being built. I think this one was 5 minutes or 3 minutes. 5 minutes, about 5 minutes. The other one is a little bit longer. And during the course of this, you see how the piece is built. architecturally. It's a different kind of time. The parallel would be, I guess, since we talk about architecturally, you could think of it as a parallel in architecture. In architecture, we constantly use two different scales. We think of the floor plans and we think of the space. Some architects tend to think more of the perceptual, and they talk about architecture as a walkthrough. And other architects tend to think about the models and the plans. The models is already an intermediate space. And yet when we talk about music, these two temporal scales, in analysis class we talk about one, and in Jornades like this we talk about another one. And it's strange how, I guess a symbol would be kind of thinking of a cathedral, that you could understand a cathedral, the floor plan of a cathedral without knowing what the facade was like. And that's where the title comes from, the challenging the hegemony of performance time, because we tend to not think about them. We're trying to see if we can find a meaning, or if we can at least acknowledge a meaning in this atemporal aspect of it.
Okay, so in opposition to your reflections, I have to recognize that I have a personal battle with social networks and so on. So for me, all the social networks are some kind of ways of making our lives completely lazy and, let's say, immediate. So they are sometimes in detriment of reflection and trying to go to take some decisions and provide your thoughts into a specific way. So they provide all the information you need in the right one moment, and the worst thing is that maybe in 5 minutes you forget about that. So this is one of my personal battles that I am trying to reflect. With that information, and taking what you say about the piece as an architecture, so our goal was to trying to provide something like a tool. It's an experiment, so it's our first version, a tool trying to show the people the structure of this piece in order to make them to reflect what is happening inside. So the final question is it possible to show the people and to make the people think what is happening inside using some tools that are designed for the opposite goal? It's a kind of strange thing. The answer for us is yes, and that's why we build this strange thing, which is what we call the slow concert. I'm sorry, Rubén, because it's, so in fact, we are playing actually a concert in Instagram, in the social network. We are playing. Yeah. That's the kind of things that we want to provoke with that. So, technically speaking, in terms of audio, we are taking the original notes and we are expanding in time in order to avoid this performance time that you were saying before, and also to forget the short-term memory and the mid-term memory of the human brain, in order not to focus on the aesthetic pleasure of listening to the piece, but to provoke to think about the piece. That's why we extended the piece to a limit that I think that the concert that we are actually playing on Instagram is up to 72 days. So this piece will be performing until I think it's 30 of January of next year. So this is the expanding time. The other thing is that, I cannot see I need some glasses. Yes, this piece we expand the time, but we keep the proportions. So the time, so we are still respecting the rhythm. And we are, maybe you cannot appreciate here because the computer is somehow forced to do a lot of computations, but there is, for each of these sequences, this series that Weber decided for the piece, there is a different reverb. We make different convolutions for each of the series in order to allow the listener, virtual listener, to have different impressions while he's listening to different series. Okay, this is one attempt.
This would correspond to the. There's always a
the same series in retrograde. So if there's the P something, there's the P something, there's the P retrograde. P something. If there's the I retrograde at the same time, and they cross. So symmetry is very important in this one, and that was a way of unifying left hand, right hand, and to create this. We respect something.
And the matrix that is created, but with all these, I don't know how to say, straight series and inverted ones, is all the matrix of numbers that is here. But this matrix of numbers, as you have seen in this fast demo of the piece, is appearing step by step. It's not at the beginning. So the idea is at the beginning you only see some squares, and after you, maybe 30 days, you can start visualizing what's happening behind of that. Okay, what else? This is the basic idea. Let me show you a little bit. It's quite basic. So the code which is behind is all the MIDI file is controlled using you cannot see here because it's in black background. I don't know what's happening. It's in Python. The visual part is designed in processing. This is the code for the visual part, and the audio is designed in Super Collider. So it's a mix of three different codes. And the idea, and it's one of our contributions to the science, is that all this code will be in GitHub, which is a public repository for code. So you can take this code, change, modify, and do whatever you want. And finally, what we suggest you is that you can listen to the concert in this Instagram account. We started only 2 days before, so only few notes are there, but you can listen. Yes, you should. It depends on the internet connection, but you should be able to listen here, the notes appearing, maybe 3 or 4 different notes per day. So if you follow this account, you will be attending to this concert. Okay?
Be patient.
Yeah, be patient. And basically that's all. So the conclusions, I have some conclusions written here, is that we don't know if we are providing an analysis of the piece. We don't know if this is a real analysis or is it just a reinterpretation. We will debate. We will share this idea with you in order to have a debate, so we are not sure of that. We don't know if we provoke to the audience that is following this Instagram account, if they can reflect, think about the piece. So we don't know. Maybe we have comments. Maybe during these days we have comments. We have only few followers. Actually, we only have 8 followers, which is you, me, my wife. I don't know.
I don't have Instagram. So.
Okay. So we don't know if we. This is in relationship with what Luca said before in a previous. Maybe this is a starting point. It's not a definitive option, but maybe this is an inspiring idea to create new environments for concerts. Maybe this is a new tool to make some concerts, or maybe not. But this is an idea that we want to explore. And what else? What else? I don't know. Yeah, so we are discussing sometimes also whether it's better to use this Instagram format that we are presenting right now in the screen to present this piece, or if, maybe it's better to show the installation version, which is what you have been at the beginning. In a conference, you can program to these installations to large just 1 day, 2 days, or whatever you want. So you can select expanding. So maybe Instagram is better for some cases, maybe the installation is better for other cases. We really don't know. We will continue having feedback and reflecting about that and see what's the next version of the next piece that maybe is, I don't know, Beyoncé or something like that. No? David Bisbal, something important. Okay, so maybe it's terrible. That's all for us. Thank you.
Wonderful. Some question, comment about this interesting project?
Are Sorry?
What do you think that Weber would have thought of this?
Like, who like?
He hopefully wouldn't recognize it as his piece, which is, I mean, I understand he wouldn't. Also, considering that Weber, for him, time was very important and the expression of time. So we know the model isn't good in that. That's where the second part of making the model and criticizing was. We've eliminated, in a way, many of Weber. Different thing is if people think that that's an important part of Weber, then this is not. But it allows us to explore this, to explore how deep is this architecture, how important it is, because we talk about it a lot. I think Opus 27 is probably the most, I think it's the most written piece, the most written about piece in of atonal music. It's probably short and it's very clear maybe, but and yet very little is dedicated to things that we talk about in places like this. Historical references, but he was clearly a musician and he clearly had this also in there. So yeah, it's Weber probably wouldn't have liked this at all. Maybe he would have liked it as an experiment.
Well, first of all, I just want to tell you that you just won an follow-up.
Okay.
That's very interesting.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you, because I talked previously earlier this afternoon about music and architecture. And just like one question is, if you say that the piece is built as a building, what would be the raw material of that building?
See.
Because that's a question that I thought a lot about. And it's not quite, I mean,
No.
there are multiple answers.
It's a partial metaphor. It's a partially structured metaphor. You're right. I think I would have to say that there's a part of it is a raw material, and the other part is a presentation of the raw material. So I think reducing it to a series or even to the two hexachords is too material. Right? This is music, even though it lasts 72 days, and we'd be fooled in not hearing it as music. I think that's an important fundamental part. But then I think that the movement part is important. So the way in which these are presented, these are two hexachords that are a complement. So they're actually a transposition one of the other. They always work they're always presented in retrograde at the same time. So even though we have no tritones here or here, we have tritones constantly here. So it's that tension between those two dimensions that I think creates it, which would make it different from a tonal piece in this view. Tonal piece is a tonal object that, since it's music, we need to hear it in time. So the first thing we do is we break it. We break the major triad, and eventually we fix it at the end. But I think it would have to be those two things, I guess, to generate it. And I think that the architectural part is okay, but I mean the parallel with architecture was in this incomprehension, right? We look at it one way and we have the other that we don't pay attention, and they have the other way and they don't pay attention to it either, or recently they have. But I think that the parallel isn't perfect. Even in this case, we're seeing how the building is being built, because if we see the building built, we get nothing, right?
Yes, I would suggest you, Rubén,
Yeah.
as an architect, he talked about the duality between form and design.
Yeah.
And I think it would be very useful because, for example, a glass of water, its form, it's not a glass of water, it's the abstract void or ability of such glass to contain a liquid. So form is an abstraction of design, and there are infinite possible designs that would fit in a common form as a pattern. And I think that would be related to what you talked about of how you would approach music analysis with models, and opposing them, for example, with architecture models that we use to actually conceive space in the very initial phase of design. That was very interesting.
Thank you. In fact, let me add one thing, that one of the criticisms that Felix makes to this model is that we are not showing the tritones which are in between the series. So it could be interesting to start designing to not from raw just displaying the series, but displaying the interesting parts of this architecture. Okay, so, and this is one of the discussions that he would like that will be shown here, but in the programming point of view, I am still working on that.
We need to think about it, maybe a different coordinate system. If the center is this tritone, which is where the rows intersect, if you look at, they all go like this, and every time they intersect, there's a square in the middle. If that is the important part, I don't know if it was for Webern, but for this vision of this, for this ordered view of it, then we need to, but it is a tool. Yeah, now we know. So,
yes, I'm really impressed about this emphasis on order and construction, and I miss the other part, of course. And I don't intend to say which is more important, but I do remember when I was in Vienna, two of my teachers were direct from the Schoenberg line, students, and they were quite orthodox, and it was nearly impossible to get them in composition class, to get them to talk about rows. They refused. They said, uninteressant. They said, forget it. Not worth it. We insisted. We were so curious. We thought, wow, it's direct from Schoenberg's hands. You know, we want to learn the row system, and they said no. And finally, one day, we got this anecdote from one of them. He said one day, a student of Schoenberg's came to him, very happy, and he said, "Master, master, we just found somebody else in Vienna who is composing dodecafonic." And Schoenberg looked at him and stared at him and said, "Does he also make music?" Which is the big question, because what is the senses? What are the senses of this music? Of course, there is a constructive element, but what about the part that when you hear it feels like a speech, like somebody's talking to you in quite a funny way? How would that fit into your model?
Well, we've substituted for something else. That's where music begins, right? We show a structure, we show how it's made. That's it. That's where analysis takes us. If we give just the tone rows, that's nothing. You need the rest. So here, we've kept the tone rows and we've done something else, as innocuous as possible. So this doesn't have any pretensions to be the Webern Opus 27 at all. Not even of being a musical piece on its own. It does have the same. You could think of it almost as how far can we take it until it's not Webern anymore. The emphasis on the tone rows is what we were talking before. I'm sure that he had no interest in the tone rows, except for the properties that you get. And those are the properties that should be visual here, should be visible here. I guess you could think of it as a parallel with even with tonal music. Tonal music is a scale, but it's much more than a scale. Here we show the scale, but it should be much more than a scale. But how much? Well, when you see this, then you know how much Webern is beyond the tone rows. So I guess that's where Webern would fit in this.
Someone else? Question?
It's late.
You have more friends in Instagram now. Huh?
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's true. 2 views.
Thank you.
You have 2 accounts on purpose.
Yeah, because I had Yeah, one is with a slash between slow and concert, but there is nothing. This is because...
There was no videos, and I
So-
just saw one, and then I looked for the other one, and there's two low constant accounts.
No, this
So
one.
I just follow both, just in case.
I have to delete the other, but because
Okay.
I had problems because this account should be, because this account was closed by Instagram because there is a bot program that is automatically uploading things to Instagram. And Instagram doesn't allow that, and they cut my account. Then I had to create new account, so these are practical problems.
Yes, it's the one with no videos. So maybe you have like 20 followers in the one with no videos.
Okay, I will delete the other one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's Weber in Russian style, no?
Yeah. Okay, 15 followers. Thank you very much.